We welcome now to the program Representatives Rob Roberson and Kent McCarty. They serve as the chair and the vice chair of the House Education Committee. Representative Roberson, McCarty, good to see you guys. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us. We've been looking forward to this all week. So.
Well, good. This is more fun than being there at the Capitol dealing with all that stuff.
Especially this time of year.
You've been burning the midnight oil, working on lots of different legislation, and here we are with, it looks like, what's going to be a brand new way of funding K-12 education in the state of Mississippi. The legacy MAEP formula has been shelved. Is that kind of where we are there, Rob?
That's where we are. I was really lucky this year. I had some really good young men that surrounded me, and when we hit the ground this year, that was priority one for us. We were trying to figure out what would be the best approach to changing this, and we got in a room and started talking and coming up with ideas. I know that Kent has been working on something like to do this for at least the last 2 years, and we were sitting there, and I kind of made the comment: what if we could do this? What if we could move forward and do something transformative for our state? And lo and behold, we're here. So it's really come together. I'm so proud of the House members, the House Education Committee, and I cannot be more happy with the Senate coming to the table. Let's coming up with a way to bang this out and make certain that we're helping our kids the way we should be.
Representative McCarty, let's review the chronology here. You guys were on the show early on in the session introducing to our audience this new approach to funding K-12 education, so called the Inspire Act. It passes the House, gets sent over to the Senate. The Senate, on the other hand, has a different idea about perhaps how to tweak the education formula, mainly just amending the present legacy MAEP formula. So those cross the halls, and then each respective house says, well, the heck with that, scratches it and puts their own stuff in there. Is that kind of what happened?
Kind of, yeah. So we, that's usually, that happens a lot in the Capitol. Usually, you do that in the hopes that it leads to some talks and some compromise. And as the chairman mentioned, fortunately, that's what happened in this case. So.
Okay, so you guys get back together, and it looks like the Senate gets to be more on board and more comfortable with the House's strategy and formula there.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of valid questions. I think that we just needed to sit down and kind of explain, this is our intention behind this. This is what our, what our kind of goals are in passing this formula. And they obviously had some reservations about not having some kind of formula to arrive at your base student cost. And we came to the table. They came with a very reasonable proposal, for that calculation. And we talked it over, looked at the long-term implications of that, wanted to make sure it was something we could afford. But I think, again, it ended up making the whole proposal better in the end. And the best part about it was it preserved the original intent of our bill, which was to make sure that funding, this big boost of funding, we're talking about $230 million, that money is getting sent to the districts that have the most needs, that aren't able to meet their students' basic needs. So that original intent, obviously, we were dead set on that, and it made it to the final bill, and we're super excited about that.
Representative Roberson, let's share the details with our audience. We start out with a base figure. And then we start adding and adjusting that based on certain conditions and circumstances. Talk about that.
We started with a $6,695 base figure. That figure is come up with something similar. With MAEP had a base formula that they had as well, and this is similar to that. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. That number is plugged in, and then we have weights that we add to things, whether that be English learners. Whether that be a tiered version of children with special needs, a sparsity requirement that we have in there, and then a weight for children that are below the poverty level. And all of that is come together, and we come out with a number. And it's a lot more predictable. That's one of the things that we wanted to be able to do, is have something that was a lot more predictable for our schools. For me, the tiered 1, 2, and 3 for the special needs children probably is the most important part. And I'll be very honest with you, I'm not as comfortable with the weights that we ended up with, but here's the reality. We can continue looking at this over the next few years. I'm kind of in a unique situation. My wife is a physical therapist for children with special needs, so
Okay.
I completely understand what these parents go through, and I thank God every day that I didn't have to experience some of the things that these people have to go through. So one of the things that I know as chairman of education, and I know that Kent's in the same boat that I'm in, and we really want to be in a position to, as we move forward in the future, to be able to maneuver those weights so that we can help these parents and make certain that these kids are getting the things they need. And for that matter, the kids that live in poverty, I mean, my goodness, we've got to make certain that we're taking care of these kids. And the truth of the matter is, either we're going to pay now or we're going to pay later. And I really want us to be in a position for these kids to have the same kinds of options that my children have whenever it comes to moving forward in life, whether that be go to college or whether that be able to go get a skill that they can take care of their families.
Yeah, so Representative McCarty, a couple of things is, what about the factor that adjusts the formula in the future for inflation?
So this was something that we again looked when we were working with the Senate on, tried to find some compromise on, and it's a 20-year average of inflation that's applied to 25% of that base student cost. And the reason for that being that's the percentage of the actual base student cost that we determined was subject to inflation. So the largest chunk of that cost is teacher pay, which is set by the legislature. So that part of it is not subject to inflation and really doesn't need to be adjusted for inflation. So we limited it just to those factors in classroom spending that are subject to inflation. And that ensures, that as, if we level fund next year and there's been 1 or 2% inflation, we've actually effectively cut education funding by not keeping up with that inflation. So we wanted to make sure that was in there from the beginning. We were happy to see that was in the final bill as well. And I think that was a big concern from a lot of superintendents we heard from. They see all the inputs that go up as long as, as far as classroom expenses, supplies, things like that. They just want to be able to keep up with that and keep up with that as we fund them. So that was a big part of that. And I think, again, that was key to getting this bill across the finish line.
That's a bit of a departure, is it not, from the legacy MAEP formula's approach to factoring in inflation?
It is, yeah. So that was they had an inflation factor as well, but it was applied to 40% of base student costs, which is why these last few years we've seen record inflation. We've also seen in that time the base student cost of MAEP balloon well beyond what would reasonably be increased just for inflation alone. So we were happy to rein that in. Again, the key to this, and one of the most important parts as we talked about this, was that we wanted to make sure that this was sustainable, that if we fully fund it this year, which we've passed a budget, and we've got a budget bill filed to fully fund it, if we fully fund this year, we want to be able to fully fund it next year and the next year and the next year, because I think that's key in any kind of formula. You've got to put the money up. And we wanted to make sure this was written in a way where it covered the cost, but also didn't break the budget in the process. And I think we've done that here.
Speaking of the fully funding, what about those who historically have been critical of the legislature for not fully funding under the old MAEP program? What's their attitude about this new plan?
I think there's a lot of healthy skepticism that we will continue to fully fund this, and I understand that. But I think, to that I would say, there are reasons we didn't fully fund MAEP that maybe it wasn't smart to do that aren't the reasons we always talk about. People talk about how old it is or how confusing it is. None of that was really the issue. The issue was that putting the same amount of money, the same $230 million into MAEP, you would have seen tens of millions of that money go to districts that already have well enough resources to fund their own education. And that was what we wanted to rectify with this, so that if we were going to put this huge investment forward, that we spin it in a way that made sense instead of continuing to send it to districts that don't really need the extra state support. I mean, any district would tell you they need more money, but we wanted to make sure those that, don't have basic needs like, ceilings. Some classrooms you can look up and see the sky, gyms with so many buckets on the floor that you can't actually use the gym because of the roof leaks so much. And when you ask why is that, they tell you we just don't have the resources. We've got to keep staff, which they've got to have. We got to provide basic needs for the students. We don't have money to do roof repairs and things like that. So we seek to rectify that with this formula. We
got a break right here, but on the other side of it, Mr. Chairman, I'd like for you to talk about how this does, in fact, affect the local portion of the funding, how this changes how this works for them. We're coming right back, folks, with Rob Roberson and Kent McCarty, members of the Mississippi House of Representatives, Chair and Vice Chair, respectively, of the House Education Committee. Stay with us. Well, studio, we're visiting with Roberson and Kent McCarty, members of the Mississippi House of Representatives, the chair and vice chair of the Education Committee. So, Mr. Chairman Roberson, tell us about how this new formula changes the local responsibility as part of the combination of state and local funds.
Well, first and foremost, I want to be clear. The superintendents were talked to. Now, not all of them. We talked to as many as we could during this session. We're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue having these conversations with superintendent, teachers, the people that actually have to do the day-to-day when it comes to dealing with our kids. But the bottom line is we're trying to get the school districts that can afford to do the things that they frankly have already been doing, that they understand that that's going to continue to be their responsibility. But we're going to try to focus our attention on those school districts that are having a hard time. I mean, if you've got a school district that only has about 500 kids, and you've got a county that has different districts in it, and each one of them only have 500 kids in it, we need to have a serious conversation about what consolidation looks like. We obviously don't want to harm a district that is at an A or B level and doing well, but on the same token, we cannot financially keep putting money into a place where you're not getting the bang for your buck whenever it comes to making certain these kids are getting the things they need. You cannot sustain a school district with 500 kids. You just can't. And you don't have, generally speaking, you don't have a local tax base that will support that either. So we're going to have a conversation, and this is something that the locals are going to have. I would much prefer our local people come to terms with what does that look like. Let's let them have these conversations, and it would be absolutely brilliant if these folks would show up and say, hey, we live in X county, we have 3 school districts, we'd like to consolidate. What can you do to help us? Because I can tell you, I'm going to be 100% on board with having a conversation with these people and say, all right, what do you need? What can we do to support you? What can we do to make certain this works? Now, I'm not talking about just throwing money at a because that generally speaking, everybody thinks in education, oh, you're just throwing money at it. That the reality is, without money, it's awfully hard to get anything done. But if we've got a game plan that puts us in a situation over the next 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years out, that we know that school district is going to be sustainable, it's going to have the right resources for those children, that's what we need to be focusing our attention on. And we're going to be listening to our principals, our teachers, and our superintendents, and trying to kind of come up with a game plan. Now, the truth of the matter is consolidations is not a fun process. And I can tell you, my district, we went through a consolidation process a few years ago. It was painful, but it was the right thing to do. And Oktibbeha County and Starkville Public Schools, we're better off for it. And we're going to be moving forward in the future. And it's something that I know that when I have grandchildren and if they stay in that area, we're going to be in a far better position in 10, 15 years than we are today.
So, Representative McCarty, I mean, I think that most people believe that there are certainly districts which are candidates for consolidation. They make sense from a proximity perspective. They make sense from just what Bob was talking about, just the sheer number of students doesn't really justify having their own district with, of course, the back office requirements and the superintendents and all the administrators that have to be part of that process. And if I'm not mistaken, do we not have some districts that maybe only have 1 school, 2 schools in them, right?
That's correct, yeah.
That seems kind of silly to the average person. But then on the other hand, you got some really well-performing districts that you, just as Rob said, you don't want to interfere with that. That's working. Let's don't mess with that.
Yeah, I think, anytime we look at consolidation, and there was, before I got here, some much smaller scale than what the chairman had in his area, but some consolidation in my area that was, it's always it can be messy at first. And you got to get the local buy-in as well. And I think once you do that, in my area, once you do that, we brought a school district into the larger county school district. It was a very small school district that was struggling financially in a lot of ways. And the student achievement was not great either. So we were able to bring them into our county school district, which opened up so many more resources to them. But it took, getting everybody kind of on the same page. And that still was a messy process. But there's so many different facets. I mean, these smaller communities, so many of those communities, the school is like the whole community, and that is the economic driver in that community. Yeah. We can have a conversation about whether or not that's good or bad, but that's the reality, and we have to be cognizant of that when we do this, that, we're not talking about going into communities and shutting down schools and gutting that community. We're talking about on the district level, bringing districts together so that they can pool resources. And that may look like a lot of different innovative solutions that we've talked about. We've had meetings with some superintendents in the Delta about, how we can help them, by bringing in some technology. We've talked about some pilot programs, things that would make it easier for them to provide that, level of education that we see in larger districts on a smaller scale to a district with less resources. I just think there's a lot of ways we can look at that and ways that would be popular locally and also beneficial to the students.
It just seems like it's a conversation that comes up from time to time, but we just don't seem to be able to take too much action on it. What do you think, Mr. Chairman? Are we getting an appetite for that, maybe?
Politics is a funny thing. we can put a lot of talk behind this stuff, but I think the reality is that with the new speaker that we have, I think with the leadership that we have in the Senate, I think the appetite's there to do the right thing. And if we all come to the table with a clear heart and a clear head to say, hey, we're not doing this for the adults, we're doing this for the kids.
Yeah.
And I really do believe if you have that conversation, you lead with your heart, you lead with the reality that you're trying to make this better, I do believe you'll get the buy-in. Now, the politics of this is awful, and I'm not going to ever, I'm not going to tell you that that's not going to be a part of it.
I mean, it's protectionism.
Very much so.
At the state level and at the local level as well. And then you run into the situation where you may have two districts that are nearby that perhaps are candidates for consolidation, but the parents in those respective districts may have different ideas about what that district ought to be running their affairs, right?
The parents are probably going to be worse than the kids. There's
no doubt about that.
Generally speaking, I've heard someone make the comment that the kids wouldn't get along. The kids are going to get along fine.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the parents that we're going to have to kind of guide and lead into this and make them understand that no one's going into this with some kind of evil intent. We're going into this with the idea that if you're not showing up to the table with your kid's best interest at heart, then you may not need to be at this table. We're here to do what's right.
I've always thought, perhaps, Representative McCarty, that maybe it makes sense that we take the really high-performing districts and just lay them out side by side with the failing districts and see where there's some differences. I think sometimes you probably look at the district level expenses and find it's more expensive in the poor performing districts than the better performing districts.
I think that'd be an interesting thing for us to look at for sure. Just looking at because there are high performing districts that are on the lower end, as far as resources. There are low performing districts on the higher end of resources, and I think it would be good for us to sit down and that's something we've committed to do, having more conversations with superintendents and just looking at what are you doing that's working. And really those answers on the local level, I think, provide us a lot of insight for what we can do on a state level to make it easier for districts to do these things on their own. I think that would be, we're all about local control and education. That's kind of the hallmark of education in Mississippi.
Sure.
And I think everybody's happy with that. But I think if there are things we can do to give them the support they need to make these decisions and to kind of point their district in the right direction, I think we're happy to do that here.
Mr. Chairman, before we go, we had kind of a run, had some legislation that would have expanded school choice options in the state. The final disposition of that, if I'm not mistaken, is that we're forming a group that's going to study this a little further. Is that correct? A task force?
We didn't actually put anything in law, but we've committed to coming together and making some looking at some of this. The reality is that whenever you put all of this on the table and you start weighing this out to see how much it's going to cost, sometimes you have a little bit of different idea of maybe what we should do or what we shouldn't do. The reality is that, and I've said this before and I'll continue saying it, everything's on the table as far as I'm concerned. I want to have a conversation about what helps our kids move forward and have a better life here in Mississippi. And I want to attract more people to come to Mississippi. Mississippi is a great place to live. The doors are wide open for economic development. Let's get it going and make some things happen. So from my standpoint, everything's on the table. I want to have a conversation that is not protectionary in any way, shape, or form, but is innovative in how we approach our problems in the future.
The speaker had high hopes for perhaps getting something done there. I don't think he's given up on this as well. And I know when I had discussions with him, he knew what was happening in Alabama. It looks like they've kind of leaped over us there and got some fairly sweeping education choice legislation passed.
Yeah, I haven't really followed what's been going on over there, but I know we've obviously been focused on this funding formula this session, and I think it would be wise of us to give this some time to work its way through the system and see what outcomes are affected by it, what's improved just by providing these critical resources to districts that need it, and then maybe seeing where we go from there. But that's obviously taking up all of our time this session.
No, I understand. But hopefully we got 3 years left in the term. You guys are going to be around for that period of time at a minimum, and then probably back for more. But maybe we can keep this conversation going.
Sure thing.
Yeah. All right. Representatives Roberson and Kent McCarty, who chair and vice chair the Education Committee in the House, have been our guests. Appreciate you guys coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Coming right back, folks, in the